Now all that's left to build is the top portion, which is a little tricky, but if I figured it out, it's probably easier than I think it is. So to get started, you'll need the measurements of your screen. This will determine the rest of the measurements, so it may be different for you. My screen is an Acer V226 HQL, which has a surprisingly standardized screen size of 12 inches tall by 20 inches wide. I just need to make a frame around it, so I'll take 24 minus the width of the screen, which gives me 4. Then divide that by 2, which is 2, and I have my 2 side pieces, which will span the height of the frame, which in my case is going to be 22 inches tall. Now for the sections above and below depend on how high you want the screen in that 22-inch section. In my case, I'm going to have a bottom section of 9 inches tall by 20 inches wide, and a top piece that's only 1 inch tall and 20 inches wide. That piece is much shorter because I'm going to be building a light box, which I'll show you in a little bit. Once I have my pieces cut, I'm simply going to glue and clamp them together. I'm also going to add on a couple pieces of scrap wood to act as braces to make sure it retains a fair amount of structural integrity. Once those are in place and the glue is set, I'm going to start sizing up the cross brace, which will hold the screen in place. For this, I'm using a 6-inch wide board that spans the full 24-inch width. Now, depending on your screen configuration, this will be different, but the board is 6 inches wide because there's 4 mounting points on the back of this screen, which are 5 inches apart. I also had to go to my local hardware store to find the right size machine screws, but it all worked out. Once my board is cut, I'm going to very carefully remove the base from the screen and slide it into the frame. Once there, I'll be able to measure what I'll need to connect the brace to the frame. In my case, it was just over 1.5 inches. Next, I'll grab some more scrap wood and cut it to size. The length doesn't really matter, just as long as you can fit the 6-inch board on top of it. I'll then attach the pieces with glue and screws. I'm going in at an angle like this because the screws are just slightly too long and I didn't want them poking out the front. Now I'm going to measure where I need to drill out 4 of these holes, and to do that I'm just going to lay down a piece of paper and sketch over the back where the holes are, and then mark where the holes come out of the screen. That way when I put my board into place, I can use the paper as reference and mark where the holes should go. This won't be perfect, which is why I'm drilling a slightly larger hole than what I need in case I'm off by a little bit. Once my holes are drilled, I'm going to fasten it into place with glue and screws. You'll see I'm also nailing it into place just so it doesn't move when I drive in the screws. Once in place, I'm actually going to put it in the cabinet temporarily so I'll easily be able to mark where it goes and install a couple braces in the back using, you guessed it, scrap wood. Now that those are in place, I'll remove it from the arcade and wrap it with vinyl. Once that's done, I can install the screen by placing in the 4 machine screws, but with washers so they have a little more surface area to hold on to. Now it's just a matter of sliding the whole assembly into place and very carefully driving in a single screw on either side, which will go into the screen's brace. Alright, almost finished with the build. All that's left is the top panel and this light box, and it's easier than it looks. All I'm doing here is making the top panel as wide and as thick as the sides, but only 24 inches long so it can sit in between. This way I'll be able to apply the T-molding so it all matches. But before I fasten that into place, I need to make the light box. And for that I'll just take 2 pieces of scrap wood and make them the standard 24 inches wide. The height of the back piece will be 5 inches tall, while the bottom will be 2.5 inches, and I'll simply nail them together. I'm also going to be spraying this with some spray adhesive and wrapping this in aluminum foil so it's much more reflective when I install the light. And speaking of which, the light I'm using is a very inexpensive USB powered LED strip that fits nicely in this box. I'll simply drill a hole out of the back and slide the strip through and place it so it's facing up and towards the back, so the reflective foil can spread the light around evenly so I can't see the individual LEDs through the outside of the sign. Once I've done that, I'm going to slide it into place and make sure everything fits nicely. Next, I'm going to move on to mounting the top panel, which is as easy as nailing on 2 pieces of scrap wood for the panel to float on. For this, I'm using my guide stick and a piece of scrap wood that's the same thickness as the panel, so everything is lined up nicely. Just make sure when you nail in the braces, you leave yourself enough room in the front for your light box to be mounted. Once in place, I'll nail in the light box and add a coat of paint to the top of the top panel. Once that's dry, I'll put it in place and start measuring for the front plexiglass. Now this next part is a little tricky and it is optional. I'll show you an alternative in just a second. But what I'm doing here is using a straight edge in reference to the front face to mark where the groove will go that the plexiglass will slide into. After marking it, I'll make a very shallow cut on my table saw, and depending on the thickness of the glass, you may need to make a second pass, but when it's done, it should look something like this. Once the groove is cut, I'll attach the top with a few brad nails through the sides and apply another strip of foil to complete the box. So a much easier alternative to that is simply tacking on a strip of wood to the top so that the plexiglass has something to sit up next to so it doesn't sink back into the light box assembly. Downside of that though is you will have a shadow depending on how thick you make that piece of wood. Now it's just a matter of buying and cutting the plexiglass, and you can easily find this stuff at any home goods store, but you may be able to save a few bucks if you live near a general surplus store. I found this cutoff piece for just $8. This stuff also cuts pretty easily and with a regular saw blade. Just make sure you're going slow and steady. The dimensions are 5 inches tall and you guessed it, 24 inches wide. Once it's cut, I'm going to apply my arcade sticker I had a local shop cut for me. After carefully centering it and applying it, I'm going to sand the back to fog the glass. This actually took way too long to do. Save yourself some time and buy a can of glass froster instead. After that, I'll slide it into place and drill 2 holes to mount it, making sure they are even on both sides. I'll also pre-drill the holes so I don't split the MDF frame. Wouldn't want to do that this far into the project. And to finish it off and to hide the screw heads, I'm going to grab some red thumbtacks, cut off the tips, and glue them onto the screw heads. After that, all that's left is applying the vinyl to the sides, and to do that, simply patch any imperfections and sand it smooth. After wiping it down, spray the vinyl with a little bit of soapy water, making sure not to spray towards the electronics, and squeegee it into place. Once that's done, you can hammer in the T-molding. Now for the electronics. This part is pretty easy and doesn't have to be perfect. I'll start by adding a little table to set everything onto. I'm using Velcro to hold down the RPI since I use it for other projects and I'll need to remove it occasionally. Next, I'll staple a zip tie to the side to hold the wires in place. I'm also using a power strip to plug everything into. The wire for this will run down to the bottom where I'll plug it into an extension cord that I'll bring out of the back by drilling 2 holes, one through the top and the other out of the back side. Now I'm using a dark green extension cord because that's just what I have on hand. I'd prefer a black or red one, but this one will work fine for now. And to finish it off, I'm sticking around the inside perimeter some color changing LED lights. These are pretty cool and give it a nice glow when in use. I'm gonna make mine red so it matches the base and controls. That's pretty cool. And one last item is color matching these joystick aprons with a bit of white spray paint. And that's it, we are finished. Okay, so once that is all done, you can start enjoying your hard work. And if you're wondering why I didn't put a back panel on this just yet, it's because I'm waiting until I get much better vinyl to put on this, as well as much better speakers. Right now the speakers in here I need for other applications, so I'm going to be taking it out, as well as the RPI. I'm going to use it for different projects. So I'm going to be interchanging those out pretty often, and until I get a standalone set of speakers that I'll be able to mount to the backside, I'm just going to wait and hold off on the door. But in the meantime, if you've made it this far, I know you can make a back panel. It's just a matter of putting another 24-inch wide panel on a set of hinges so it can swing open. Since this is on an angle, you'll have to set the door up a little bit so when it opens, it doesn't hit the base. but below that you can just put another panel that doesn't swing open, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Just make sure the glow lights in the back, the ones that are red, are mounted outside the door so you can actually see them. But otherwise, this thing, I'm gonna call this complete for now. I also want to touch on a couple questions I got in part 1, which are how loud these buttons are. And honestly, I don't know. I don't have anything to reference off of, but they sound like they're from an arcade. They have a really nice click to them. They're not too bad. Maybe enough to annoy your cat. So another question I got were the screw heads next to the joysticks and if they hurt your hand. And the answer is no. I've been playing this for a while now, and I've been purposely running my hand over these screw heads to see if anything hurts my hand or gets in the way, and so far it's been great. If you have the opposite results and they're a little rough, just grab some sandpaper or a file and smooth it over a little bit and you should be fine. Alright folks, well that is it for part 3. Thank you again for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. See what I'm up to on Facebook and Instagram, and send me some photos of what you're able to make thanks to this video. And I will see you next time. Thanks again. Yes! That's a wrap.